Welcome back to Quantum Conversations. My name is Sarah, and I'm so excited to bring you another episode with my co-host, Carrie Bennett. We are really enjoying giving you this show and talking about these topics that seem really complex so that we can help them be a little bit more understandable to the everyday person. I just wanted to remind you to head down into the show notes to make sure you get my free resources and Carrie's free resources. We've both spent a lot of time compiling our favorite list of products, as well as how you can actually implement a lot of these things into your daily life for free using our guides. We also both have amazing courses that you have access to in the show notes as well. And we co-host a course together called Quantum Fertility. We've actually had some quantum fertility babies just born this summer, and we have several quantum fertility pregnancies going on right now where women were told that they were not going to get pregnant, and we have been able to show them the way using these circadian principles and quantum biology, and we're so grateful for this. So make sure you head down to the show notes, check out those resources, check out those courses. And if you are enjoying the show, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, leave us a comment. And if you're listening on the podcast app, please head on over to Apple or Spotify, leave us up to a 5-star review. Since we are such a brand new show, we want to make sure that we're getting this message out to as many people as possible. Again, we want to make these concepts of quantum biology and circadian biology understandable and applicable to the everyday person. We want you to pull up a chair, come hang out, and enjoy this conversation with me and Carrie, and have a fantastic day. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Quantum Conversations. Today, Carrie and I are going to talk about winter eating, seasonal eating, and how we actually think that light is still more important, right, Carrie?
Absolutely. Yeah. What we're going to give here is some context about why Sarah and I don't necessarily subscribe to just one eating plan, and how maybe you might think about changing your nutrition with the seasons, and why that's a thing. Like, obviously, 1,000 years ago, we probably wouldn't have had a choice based on our location. And nowadays we can modify how we eat. And so I think seasonal eating is just a fun topic to talk about in general, especially in the winter, because if you live in a cold, dark environment, you may want to work on the types of carbs or the amounts of carbs that you consume on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I was telling you before we hit record, I put a post on Instagram on Sunday, and I got some very angry people. One man was very angry with me because he lives in Canada, and he's like, "What are we supposed to eat in the winter? Ice?" Because I had
Fasting is a thing.
He's like, "What are people in Canada supposed to eat? Ice?" And I'm like, "No, not at all." I think it's hard for people to, again, when you put a post on Instagram, it's hard to get a lot of context into an entire post. So that's why I was kind of inspired to do this episode so we could talk about it a little bit deeper. But no, you are not going to just eat ice in the winter in Canada. There's grass-fed meat. There's wild-caught fish. You can eat eggs. Some people say you shouldn't eat eggs in the winter because they're not quote unquote seasonal. I still think eggs are fine during winter. Bioavailable protein, so good for you. And then
lots of fat though too. You'll have tallow.
Lots of fat.
You'll have a fattier cooking. Yeah, maybe you got fattier, a little more fat in your cooking styles.
Yeah.
It's really quickly. I love this, Sarah, because one of the shows that we watch as a family, it's called Alone. And there's other like wilderness survival ones, and it really shows all of the work that goes into but everyone knows when the snow is going to hit in Alaska. And then they know, okay, it's like, I've got 2 more weeks. I've got to hunt a lot of food. I got to dry a lot of meat. I got to fish a lot of food, and I got to catch a lot of fish and smoke it. And they've got maybe a sack full of berries that they picked along the way that they'll preserve and they'll freeze it. But if you want to kind of consider what your seasonal eating is, you got to think about, if I were to survive by myself 365 days a year in this environment, what would I have access to? Mm-hmm. And if you're in a far northern latitude, that's why people wanted to hunt a bear or something, or lots of deer or elk or moose or something like that before winter hit, because that would provide you with all of the meat and food you pretty much would use the entire winter long.
Yeah.
Whereas if you live in, somewhere on the tropics, right? Like let's say you live in Mexico, then you have a lot more seasonal availability in terms of the produce and all of the plants that you get to eat in conjunction with maybe the meat or fish or eggs that you're also consuming, because it never gets to the point where it's too dark during the year to not grow produce. So I think just logically, we have to think of it. It makes sense. We would have eaten what we could have hunted, gathered, or grown. And now now at any time in Michigan, I can fly up, papaya from Mexico at any time and eat it whenever I want for every single meal of the day. And it's not natural.
No, it's not. It's not at all. And I think that there is some context where people can eat cellar stable foods, right? And canned foods and fermented foods, depending on their level of leptin resistance. And that's one thing I always, because people are like, well, I do live in Mexico and there are all these great foods year round. But I'm, 40 pounds overweight,
angry all the time.
Right. They have all the classic symptoms of leptin resistance. And I'm like, I would not eat those foods if I were in your shoes right now, until perhaps you get your leptin resistance under control or reversed, which you can absolutely reverse leptin resistance. That's like my biggest course that I teach, is the 21-day leptin reset of like how to reverse this. And I've had actually a couple thousand people do it at this point and, lose tons of weight and, I've had a lot of pregnancies. I've had a lot of people that work on this issue of leptin resistance, and now they can eat, if they're in the middle of the summer, if they're in the tropics, the banana, the mango, the fruit. These are not like, I used to be very dogmatic about food and just carnivore is the way to do it, and everyone should be eating this kind of meat-based diet. And now I don't think that way, because I understand food from this level of like leptin resistance, one, and also where you live and what time of year it is and how the light code is imprinted on our food. Like if the UV index goes below a 5, that's when you don't have that strong UV light to grow certain foods. And our gut microbiome syncs up with light, right? It changes with light. It changes with season. And so there's a circadian mismatch happening in our gut. Our hormones shift during different seasons. And this is all very supported in scientific literature. So it is important as we move into different seasons and we have different times in of the year to look at changing the diet a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And with all that being said, we'll talk a little bit about what a quote unquote winter diet might look like if you do live in a northern latitude, a colder, darker environment. And then we're also going to give you some nuance and lots of wiggle room, because like Sarah said at the beginning of this episode, we think that your light environment will trump, even if you do some circadian mismatch with your eating or some seasonal mismatch with your eating. And so we don't want this to be about a perfectionist mindset either, and so because that, I just had this conversation with my private community, and I said, I think that will tank your mitochondrial health.
Yes.
Way worse than if you were to eat a tropical smoothie every once in a while in the middle of winter, right? I think that mental stressor and how it changes the mitochondria and your heart rate variability are things that we want to avoid if at all possible.
Yeah. And I'm the first to admit, I will enjoy a dessert at Christmas. I will enjoy a dessert at Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
I used to be like, no, I will not eat any sugar. I will not eat any processed foods, 0. But if it's a holiday, I will have a little piece of whatever, and I'm going to enjoy it. And I don't feel terrible afterwards because I'm going home, blocking blue light after sunset. this meal, Christmas or Thanksgiving, is like in the middle of the day. Right. I go outside, I walk around afterwards, and I don't stress out about it. It's like, yeah, it's not going to 2 days of the year not going to wreck my health. It's what people do is they start up at, Halloween and they get the candy, which is really not a good idea. And then the candy drags on to Thanksgiving, and then the Thanksgiving drags to Christmas to New Year's. And then all of a sudden it's been all these months and all you've been eating is these like super high deuterium foods, and you've gained weight, you feel bad, you might have...
You haven't blocked the artificial light. You haven't done any
right.
balancing, right, with the artificial light and the light exposure. Yeah. That's what causes all that weight gain. Exactly what you described.
Yep. Yeah. And the artificial light at night, it's very insulinogenic. It raises insulin, raises blood sugar, all these things. And that's one thing that people don't take into account. There's a ton of people already talking about the processed foods and they don't really talk about it in the framework of deuterium, which I think is important to specify why it's not so good for you, because we have less ability to deplete deuterium in the wintertime. But they are talking about it, but they're not talking about this light issue, because in the wintertime, as we talked about in a previous episode, the sun goes down a lot sooner and we're meant to pop on the blue blockers, go to bed sooner, allow our bodies to undergo apoptosis and autophagy, so that we don't end up with cells that try to live forever and end up with metabolic disorders, diseases, cancers, all that stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So where do you want to start in terms of should we maybe give what an ideal, winter is, with the caveats of, yes, I eat, like my Uncle Greg does all homemade pies at Thanksgiving, at holidays. I will eat dessert on exactly those holidays. And you're exactly right. In between it's the in between. It's like the mindset that I think used to never serve me or my clients well was, this day is a waste. So, and then and that might as well, okay, well, I'm going to eat whatever I want all day now because I ate this one, this one dessert here,
cookie,
right? That I'm going to just eat as much as I want. And then, Thanksgiving, it's the weekend. I'll get back on track on Monday. And then maybe back on track a couple of days, but then, there's always a holiday party or something. Right. And so pick and choose and indulge occasionally. There's nothing wrong with that, but do note that your body likes to have a certain, my body likes to have a very certain nutrition structure with things like a really good quality protein rich breakfast, and meal spacing and eating my food in a circadian window of time. All those things make me feel really good, to the extent that I want to get quote unquote back on track.
Exactly.
After something like a Thanksgiving meal. Thanksgiving, great. Love the social aspect. I think that's super healthy as well. But the next day, don't need to have a second Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And the thing is, this is one of the things I talk about in my quantum nutrition program is that if you're someone that's kind of like me, that has this addictive personality, that, I don't touch alcohol, haven't in almost 7 years. I just don't want to poke the bear. But I used to feel that I couldn't do that with food, with sugar. I for years wouldn't touch. I was just like, I'm just going to stay abstinent. So if you feel like more comfortable doing that, I'm not knocking that at all, because I did that for years. But since I have implemented, this is just me and actually a lot of people I've worked with, since I've implemented these circadian strategies of morning sunlight and really having a strong circadian rhythm, really respecting darkness, getting cold, all these things that you and I talk about, my neurotransmitters are supported to the point where if I have the dessert, it doesn't become a 6-week long thing. That wasn't always the case for me, because I was staying up late on my phone. I was, never going outside in the cold. I was in this, eternal summer all the time. And so when I think the sugar of those foods hit my body is like, oh yeah, we're still in summertime. Let's keep cruising through with the sugar. And, so I always want to throw that in there. If you are somebody that's like, I just do better to leave it alone, then I respect that entirely. But, like you said, with the stress thing, there's a component to that also. So I totally went off onto a tangent.
No, that was important, because it is true that some people do have such an ingrained opioid surge or dopamine surge with the sweet taste, especially.
Yeah.
So and there are people, I got a couple of clients in mind who they do better without just eating, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely no judgment on that if you choose not to indulge, for sure. I have found just personally that I used to have what I would call a sweet tooth, right? You know, and almost like after, maybe not after breakfast, but after lunch, I needed something sweet. After dinner, I needed something sweet. In the evening, I needed something sweet.
Yeah.
And now
that's a sign of leptin resistance.
Exactly. And so now that my circadian rhythm is intact and obviously I worked on leptin, I worked on eating that protein rich breakfast. Like I sugars, like I could have, like, I used to love these Ethel's pecan dandies. Like they were my guilty pleasure. I can have them in the house if they're there. Like my husband will get them sometimes. And it's not like I'm like, when can I eat that Ethel's? So that's a really cool feeling to be like, wow, originally what I thought was just part of my personality. I have a sweet tooth, was something that I coached into me because of circadian disruption and leptin resistance. So, it's something that can change and shift, and it's cool to see.
Absolutely. And winter is a great time to work on. I mean, year round is a great time to work on leptin resistance, but it's easier, I think, to work on this during the winter time because the sun comes up later. There's a smaller amount of time for eating. So we don't have this decision fatigue, and it's, I think, easier to just slap on a pair of blue blockers at night, let your body heal, let your body rest. Most people have a sleep debt. I've had so many people in my private community lately. You're like, okay, so I put on these blue blockers and I want to go to bed at like 8:30. And I'm like, then go to bed.
Yeah, exactly.
You need it. You need the sleep. Don't try to fight past it and get the second win. If your body says go to sleep at 8:30, do it. If you can, if you don't have kids like me who wake you up at all hours, take advantage of that. So I think working on leptin during this time of year is super important. And for us to really get leptin signaling strong, we need strong circadian rhythms, right? So that means getting out there in the morning light and blocking the blue light after sunset, taking breaks during the day to see natural light. And then that, like you mentioned, that protein signaling in the morning, that strong protein rich breakfast. You and I both kind of keep it carnivore keto breakfast. I just feel better that way. Gives me more energy. It's easier. And so that's the way I do my breakfast. And then if I am going to have any carbohydrates, typically it's the middle of the day that I'll have those. And if it's in winter time, the carbs that I eat are going to look way different than carbs in the summer. Like I will stick more to, like, again, the cellar stable, like think about foods that you can leave on the countertop for a couple of weeks. Those are more of your winter foods.
You put them in a cellar and they can last pretty much the whole entire winter.
Exactly. And that, because everyone's like, well, I live in Canada, or this guy that was like trolling me on Sunday, he actually made a reel, and in his reel, he was like, Sarah Kleiner Wellness, you're wrong.
Thanks.
I was like, okay, well, I don't think you understood what I was saying, but that's fine. I didn't respond, but that is the situation in Canada. Like you would go for the cellar stable produce. I'm just telling you that bananas, pineapples, mangoes are very high in deuterium.
And would never grow in your location, let alone in the winter. Right. The way that those things are an issue is they have deuterium, which can jam up the mitochondria and contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction. And there's whole institutes researching deuterium and relationships between deuterium and cancer, right? Yes. So if you want to look into this, look into Laszlo Boros's work, look into Gabor Sommelier's work.
Yes.
They really have connected some major dots there.
Yes.
And so deuterium is higher in tropical sugary fruits, which would be fine if you were leptin sensitive and in the tropics, because guess what keeps deuterium at bay? Ultraviolet light and intense infrared. Both of those things combine to really help put the deuterium where the body can use it, like in the lining of the blood vessels, right? In the connective tissue. Right. Whereas, if you were to really already have a mitochondrially disruptive lifestyle in where I live in Michigan, I'll say where I live, because, and meaning I'm never outside, I'm never earthing, I never see sunrise. I don't understand artificial light and how dysregulating and damaging that is. I'm surrounded by non-native EMFs at work all the time. I wear an Apple Watch. I have AirPods in just as a natural part of my day. All that stuff disrupts the circadian rhythm.
I feel awful just hearing that.
Right. I know. It kind of makes me cringe. But then at the same time, you realized you thought it would be healthy to go on a fruit smoothie diet, as part of some sort of a,
Been there, done that.
Right?
A New Year's cleanse.
New Year's cleanse.
A New Year's cleanse. I have ruined my life over the holidays, and now I'm going to do a raw smoothie cleanse and maybe throw some juices in there too for fun. And
I know. Oh, I know. And so it's like, it's well-intentioned, right? Because it's like, quote unquote, fruit is healthy, but there's context to all of it. And the one context that we want to highlight specific to fruit and sugar is it grows in a certain place on the planet at a certain time of the year. And if it doesn't grow in your environment, maybe that's your body's sign to minimize it, reduce it. I'm not saying you have to be perfect and eliminate it at all by any means, but it's just, there's a reason why it's there. And so I love your idea of like the cellar stable produce, right? And so for me, I find that the most fascinating thing to me was come maybe end of April, I start craving salad.
Me too.
And now that craving right now, pretty close to gone, right?
That was one of the things I put in my post on Sunday. Like my post said, the worst foods to eat during the winter. And at the top of the list, it was like big salads, fruit smoothies, coconut water. Man, people got pissed off. Like I pushed a lot of buttons with that one.
You knew. I bet you right before you hit share, you were like, I think that this is going to be it.
I thought I'm going to get a headache today. That's what I thought. I'm really going to get a headache from these comments. And I did. I got the Canadian dude that made the reel about me and what are you going to do?
Spreading information. This is the thing about open mind, like learning. Life is a journey. Learning is an open-minded procedure, right? And so when confronted with information that's different than what you have, or I'll say when I'm confronted with information that's different than what I believe, instead of what I used to do was being like, I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
I now open myself up to that energetic possibility. And if I feel like I want to learn more, I will go down a little bit of a rabbit hole and learn more. And then I can make a decision. Okay, no, not for me. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it's going to reshape and mold some part of my life in some capacity. That's all it is. It's not you're right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. It's let's talk about this and maybe see if we can share knowledge that might change the way we live. So.
Exactly. And honestly, I mean, as a nutritionist working with people and myself, eating a whole foods diet, right? No keto bars and snacks and junk food, as a regular thing. People are healthier. People feel better. People are putting autoimmune diseases into remission. Sure. And they have a lot of them not even implementing light principles yet. I'm like, you got your antibodies down through doing that. Imagine what you could do if you put some light principles into your life as well. So what we're talking about is not anything like outlandish. We're just saying eating like a whole foods diet and maybe not eating like Lucky Charms and
just thinking about seasonal variations in your produce.
Yes, exactly.
If let's say, one of the nutrient dense ways of eating that I think is really accessible to a lot of people is the Weston A. Price recommendations. I love that. It's great stuff, right? And so then it's like take that framework and say, okay, well, in the summer, right? Like, so right now, I mean, the beginning of October, less so, but like, let's say August through September in Michigan, peaches and strawberries and blueberries and squash and tomatoes and peppers, like so much produce here because that's what would have grown. Great. Right. And so then it's like, okay, so what does my nutrition plan look like around that versus middle of winter? I don't want a raw pepper in the middle of winter. My body just doesn't
feel
that.
Right. Yeah. That's raw foods do not feel good in the winter. And Ayurveda, which is, I used to teach yoga for 13 years. I forget about that sometimes, but I was very
in another life, right?
In another lifetime. Before the pandemic, I was very into Ayurveda, and it's similar, a lot of quantum biology and circadian biology is in line with a lot of Ayurveda as well. Yes. Now, I don't do as much of like the rices and all that kind of stuff, especially if you have leptin resistance. I'm not a big fan of that. But they do talk about having the warming foods, during the winter time is better for you and less spicy, and no raw foods and no dried fruits and things like that. Even though dried fruits, people may have eaten those in the winter, still going to be a mismatch for your gut. To have, again, deuterium is high in foods with a lot of sugar. And a lot of like processed foods are very high in deuterium. And again, during the winter, we have less of an ability to deplete deuterium from the body. So deuterium is not bad. It's not evil. However, we don't want to be loading our bodies up with it during the winter because we have less ability to deplete it. And as you mentioned, people can go look up Dr. Laszlo Boros. I have 2 interviews with him on my YouTube channel. Dr. Sarah Pugh just put up a really long episode, and they talk about deuterium as well. So if people want to go research this topic a little bit more and see all the different diseases that excess deuterium in the body, in the mitochondria, is tied to, it's another rabbit hole you can go down. But just for the everyday layperson, just know that you don't want to be loading that stuff in your body during the winter if you are on a path where you want to prevent disease and you want to live optimally and you want to feel your best. Not everyone's on that path, but
or if you already have a disease diagnosis or symptoms expressing that could be a result of mitochondrial dysfunction, which, I mean, spoiler alert, almost all of them have some mitochondrial dysfunction associated with them, then it just might shape what you choose to consume in the winter in the middle of Canada.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not like, I don't want anyone to think I am a judgmental, like you're eating blah, blah, blah. You're bad. This food is bad. This food is good. Like, it's just what's going to be optimal for your body. If we just look at it in terms of the mitochondria, again, like what's going to allow your body to run efficiently. And you had a wonderful post on Instagram yesterday about, the mitochondria and food and how we actually don't only get energy from food. So maybe we can segue a little bit into light. If you want.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a reason why I think a lot of people keyed in on food was because ultimately they realized that the body, this is the kind of mainstream ideology around this, right? Body runs on ATP. ATP is the energy currency. In order to have healthy body, I need enough ATP. Mitochondria make ATP. Mitochondria take electrons from food and make ATP. Therefore, I really have to focus on the food aspect of this in order to optimize the mitochondria and the ATP. That's that's a half or maybe a third truth, half truth, a third truth.
Yeah.
In terms of how the body really operates in terms of energetic capacity. Really the body, yes, the mitochondria take electrons, and yes, they make ATP. And yes, the mitochondria actually also make water and carbon dioxide and infrared, all of which are important in the body for a myriad of reasons. But the ATP is not a energy currency in the way that we think of it as an energy currency. Really the water, this exclusion zone water that we've talked about a ton, and the way that the body can store electrostatic charge and things like cell membranes and then semiconduct it through places like, or move it through our connective tissue. Like that's truly how the body is operating at that scale. And so while food can provide a source of electrons to the mitochondria, it's not the only means of doing so. And so we can get electrons through earthing. We can get electrons through sunlight, expanding that exclusion zone water. Ultraviolet light can help generate free electrons in our body. Melanin in our body can break apart and donate electrons as well. And there's some research to suggest, and for those who want to look this up, look up Arturo Solis Herrera, who's written extensively on melanin. And melanin's, almost every article he's written in a publication is the unexpected capacity of melanin to split the water molecule in, it becoming dysfunctional in Alzheimer's disease, in blindness, and it's not an expected thing to have happen. But there is a lot of research to suggest that we can even get electrons that fuel our energetic processes from melanin and some actions of melanin interacting with water. And so we just kind of have to expand our minds to say, okay, food is a part of the story. Right. Yes. And the deuterium content of the food is an aspect of looking at food from a basis of seasonal and geographic, availability. But then are there other ways that we can support the body, especially the mitochondria, especially looking at things like our light environment and earthing and nature and cold? Yeah,
Cold.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, like you said, you have to keep an open mind about these things. And when you start talking about ancestral things, people get triggered, they get mad. And honestly, none of us were there, right? Like there's a lot of theories. None of us were there. But if you think about it, from what I've heard, from what I've read, we didn't wear clothes for a lot of the time, lived outside. So we were under the sun, bodies making melanin, getting nice and tan. Food wasn't always readily available to us, but we were barefoot, touching the earth, drinking mineral water, like spring water, like it wasn't contaminated the way it is now. It's just different. It's not a fair comparison to look at the modern human versus an ancestral human. And also we don't know because we weren't there, but we can only kind of just like imagine that's kind of the way it was. And so we look at, because I'm a big person to say with leptin resistance, you need to eat a breakfast. It's important to eat that protein rich breakfast to get the signal of light in your eyes, then have the breakfast. Very important for leptin signaling. And I'll get a lot of even the ancestral people pushing back on me and saying, yeah, but we didn't have breakfast back then. And I'm like, first of all, you don't know because you weren't there. And second of all, again, there's the melanin aspect. We're sleeping on the ground. We're touching the earth. We're getting energy, electrons from the earth. It wasn't a thing.
Or anywhere near as big of a thing as it is these days.
Yeah. Maybe for like, as society moved forward and we became wealthier and, had all the things. Yeah. That's when it became an issue. But back when we were, wandering the earth, whatever, people did not have leptin resistance the way that they do now. I think that 88% of people are metabolically unhealthy.
Inflexible. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say the amount of people that are leptin resistant? I think it's more than that 88%, honestly,
Many. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the other part is interestingly, there is some evidence of temporarily getting into a bit of leptin resistance and insulin resistance seasonally, right?
Yes.
When fructose was highly available in one's geographic location, that always preceded a period of food scarcity. And so you see maybe who's maybe Dr. Perlmutter is one of the ones who's done research on fructose and uric acid and insulin resistance and fat, like storing fat. And metabolic syndrome, but that's a seasonal thing, right? If we were to wait and to store nutrients until the food was gone and it was cold, then we would have been SOL. We would have had a luck, right? And so the body evolved to say, okay, there's something about the light, the way the light is not as intense for as long. The temperatures are a little bit colder, but this is the harvest season, right? Lots of fructose is available. All of those things really combined to bringing on a temporary insulin resistance. This is even measured in animals that allows people or animals to store a little bit of extra fat for the winter. In preparation for food scarcity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a post I'm kind of working on right now of FYI, we're not supposed to fatten up during the winter.
Yeah. Right.
If we look back, we were actually
look on the comments on that one.
To wait a few days.
Yeah, I gotta let it calm down a little bit.
But we're not supposed to fatten up during the winter. That's not the way it works. And there's a lot of people that say for your thyroid health, you need to be having a lot of fructose in the winter and you need a lot of, coconut water and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, my friend Danielle Hamilton, she's the blood sugar mastery person. She actually did an experiment with a CGM with an adrenal cocktail, made with the coconut water. Yeah. And it was not good. It was not good. She drank the adrenal cocktail and her blood sugar went way up and it stayed way up for 4 hours.
Whoa.
And then it came crashing down and she felt terrible. And, the whole thing is if your blood sugar goes up and stays up like that, you're creating a lot of inflammation and stress in your body. You are, it's kind of counterproductive because this adrenal cocktail is supposed to, calm the body down,
reduce your stress,
nourish the body, reduce your stress. And what you've actually done, if you get your blood sugar up that high and then it comes crashing down, is create a huge stress response in the body. And so, yeah, and I'm not a fan. That was the other thing when I put coconut water in that post. Everyone's like, what am I supposed to drink instead of coconut water? I'm like, I didn't know this was an essential thing. Like,
how many coconut trees, like palm trees, would you have climbed, chopped a coconut down? Like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm not making fun because I like a good old coconut water every once in a while.
Yeah,
on a hot day, sweaty.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Refreshing. Right.
But yeah. I mean, I think people think of electrolytes too. And I don't think people realize that you can get all those minerals and electrolytes from things like salt.
So Soleil water.
Soleil water. And meat, believe it or not, I think that's another thing, like meat and fish have lots of minerals in them.
Yeah,
too.
they do.
Like the only thing so it's not like you have to get that. I think there's a misnomer. You can only get your potassium from a banana or coconut water, or you can only get your calcium from, the cows, right? There's a lot of, or dairy, right? There's a lot of ways that we can get minerals beyond just, I think, what we've pigeonholed ourselves into believing.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think we just have to question things a little bit more. And then, look at that bio-individuality, because if you are like super athletic, you got tons of muscle on you and you're just like, highly active, maybe you can have the adrenal cocktail and it doesn't do that to your blood sugar. It doesn't cause this crazy like stress response in your body. But again, we look at that 88% of people who are metabolically inflexible and unhealthy, like most people probably shouldn't be drinking that, even in the summertime, honestly. Yeah. And so I think we need to have this more. When I talk about nutrition, I talk about food. The things I look at are your latitude and your leptin. Like that's what's important. If you're leptin resistant, like you need to stop worrying about having like tons of produce in your diet. It may be something you do want to have a little bit, right? Yeah. And do that strategically at certain times of the day. And then for women, maybe a little bit more during certain times of the month, going along with that infradian rhythm. But it's not like you don't want to be having that like at every single meal with, like protein needs to be prioritized if you're leptin resistant. It's a very, very important, and fat too, healthy fats, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the bottom line is get your light right. Make sure you're hydrated. I mean, I do. I want to do a whole nother one, I think, on hydration and histamine issues. That's a whole, there's such a huge topic. There's histamine issues are insanely on the rise. And there's actually a big connection between dehydration and histamine. And so like light and hydration are my foundation. And then, like you said, leptin is someone eating a leptin supportive nutrition plan for them, whether their leptin is low, it looks different versus leptin high, right? That looks very different, or it could look different. And then once those things are in place, then like, do I have some clients who need to actually use some, like, they have to dry brush massively because is their lymphatic system really kind of sluggish? Sure. There's so much does everyone need to dry brush in their life? No, I don't think so. I think people could benefit from it, but I don't think some people are going to be impaired if they don't dry brush every single day of their life. Whereas some people, I think, with very sluggish lymph need to do a lot of lymphatic support. So that's where the inter-individual variability comes in. If you're metabolically, like you said, if you're an active metabolically healthy person in Canada, you got way more wiggle room than that client with MS who's almost bedridden, right? Who's looking for some reversal of symptoms and some support and some mitochondrial healing. It's going to look very different. And so you might be someone who would really need to work on your deuterium content in the winter in conjunction with your light environment and all the other things that circadian wise that we talk about.
100%. Well, I'm going to make a note for next week for us to talk about the histamine issue, because that's something that's been coming up a lot in just my groups and DMs and all over the place. So I'm making a note.
Spoiler alert, non-native EMFs are, I think, the reason why we're seeing so many more these days, and that tied to histamine and dehydration. It's a fascinating observation I've had over the course of 5 years.
Interesting. All right. I'm marking it down. So if you're listening Make sure you subscribe to the show so you can hear next week's episode.
What is it? Turn on that notification bell.
Turn on the notification bell.
Give us a thumbs up. All the things that I hear every once in a while when one of my kids watches a video. Yeah,
exactly. I know. I try to add that stuff in, but it's like sounds so cheesy.
It sounds so cheesy. I know.
Yeah. We do want to keep on talking about this stuff and making this information accessible to people. And so, if you are enjoying the show, subscribe, share with a friend, family member, Facebook group, Instagram post, tag us. There
you go. You got it. That's right. Perfect.
We're good. All right. Well, thanks, Carrie. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to next week.
Same, Sarah.